rudimentary to and subordinate to a man. You know, this also underscores centuries of male oppression and denial of right to equality and freedom of expression and autonomy to a woman. Now, when you look at all this, we can see that there are two spheres I would like to, use for discussion this morning. One is the domestic. Now, confined within the domestic sphere of what is called the home and the hearth, a woman is relegated as mother, a daughter, and a wife. While this is something I want you all to think over. And then look at the other male writers or male critics or male theorists that have how they have defined women. Shakespeare calls from the play, where when a play is written or constructed or conceived by a writer, it means he has given expression to that ideology, and that is what is expressed in the text, whatever it be it a play, poem, or novel, or any other genre of writing. He calls this, I'm quoting Shakespeare, frailty thy name is woman. And look at what Aristotle says. He calls a woman an imperfect man. And then there is this blatant sexist, Freud, who says she's a castrated man, or she suffers from a lack, what is called the penis envy. And then you look at the Indian mythical myths, Kalidasa. Kalidasa's Shakuntal, if you look at her, she could not be recognized by Dushyanta without his ring, the ring he had given her. She looks for the ring and it is not there, and he refuses to recognize her. Then you look at Draupadi. Draupadi could only be saved by Krishna. And Sita was abandoned by a man, that is Rama. Now, all these are telling testimony where you can see either the fictional characters or the real ones are telling, there is what you call a testimony, what you see, testimony to a woman's peripheral, or I would call it marginal existence. In any culture, you go to any culture, read about women in any culture, she is somebody who is marginalized, pushed to the periphery. She never assumes the center stage. How and why man has succeeded in doing this? She becomes a sign or a symbol of all that is negative, which man is not, or simply the other of what man is. What man is, the binary, the rational, the active, the intelligent, the perfect, or the absolute. But history records exceptional instances of the brave and the courageous women who were able to dismantle the barriers erected against the men. The women. For example, in the Indian context, you can see Akama Devi, Kittu Rani Chanma, Rani Jhansi Rani Lakshmi Bai, Queen Elizabeth in the Western context, Victoria, to name a few. I have, consciously deconstructed or subverted the patriarchal, what we call the stereotypes. I'm sure all of you, because you are basically teachers in colleges, you know what is the conscious stereotyping of women, or the women's stereotypes, that are there in all the male literature. And hence, this kind of, marginalization or stereotyping of women, you can see women of great names that we have mentioned. As I mentioned, there are just a few names, but you can see that they have subverted the patriarchal stereotypes. And then we can say that they have been a kind of progenitors of feminist ideology. Though history also evidenced the antecedents of women writers, it is only through the women's movement of the 60s that women could openly register their liberation from patriarchal oppression. And now when we talk about liberation from the fetters of male oppression, male marginalization, and other kinds of exploitation, the 60s movement of the 60s women movements, whatever they are, we can say that it brought about three tools. We have to talk about three tools, which are the tools of women's empowerment. One is the voice, the other is the literacy, and other is the economic empowerment. Thus, women can now, and I would say that even today, this kind of denial of equality, oppression of women, exploitation of women, it has been an ongoing or empowerment. Women could, end what we can say the life of silence. Silence is the absence of speaking. Silence is absence of speaking or invisibility. So silence is absence of voice, and it also stands for invisibility, and also it stands for erasure. And I'd like to quote Toni Morrison here, a Nobel Prize winner of 1992. She says, and most writers, Indian women novelists, they seem to endorse what Toni Morrison says. Toni Morrison says, to quote her, I write without gender focus. I write out of that sensibility of what I find provocative, and especially, this is important, the sensibility of a woman. One can find that these writers that emerged out of the feminist movement of the 60s and thereafter, inscribed what we call a distinctive women's sensibility and literary consciousness. It's very important for us to understand the art of writing by women is through different ideological or cultural responses to a culture, and that's why it is essential to understand, and it is fundamental to understand that women write out of what is called an essential women's sensibility and an essential literary consciousness. This is the term used by Rita Felsky. And female aesthetics is what is called the female culture, the female culture, female language, female sensibility, female literary consciousness. And now, when you look back to the writing of women in the Indian context, look at the earlier novelists, the novelists that emerged out of the, during the colonial era and after, if at all we can recognize them. You'll have to see that they write out of vacuum, or they write out of their responses to the culture around them, to the society, within the society, how they respond to them. Now, I'd like to quote Toni Morrison here, who says, I had to bear witness to what was not recorded. You see, the history, which is inordinately male history, because everything is male, men oriented. Men are at the center, and men decide. They are the decision makers. They are the ones who say where women should be, what women should be, and how women should be. The cultural construct, the social construct, all this. So what Toni Morrison says, I had to bear witness to what was not recorded about women, the personal, the self, what she thinks to the mind. Anita Desai is a writer who gives emphasis to the inner psyche, the interior of the mind. So what you call, this is something called emanates from a woman's consciousness. And that is, I would like to look at it as something very, very radical. I'll talk about that later. What was not recorded, the woman's experience, the woman's feelings, the woman's responses, they were not heard, they were not told, they were not registered. So this is something we need to understand. So what has not been recorded, then she also adds, for this person, that is me, the mind, the I, the I, the voice, the I, this person, this female, the word female or feminine or feminist are all accepted as part of the feminist ideology and feminist discourses, also feminist criticism. This female did not exist center self. It is to say that they were always at the margin. They were never allowed to come to the center, to the mainstream. So now we see that we are going to read particularly this, I would like to talk to you about women novelists. Now, before I get into it, this is what I want you all to see. When you look at the title Indian Women Novelist, Sujat, I hope you tell me when I should stop, what time I should stop, and allow for questions. So when you look at the title Indian Women Novelist, the writing, especially the writing, I told you a minute ago that we talk about three tools which empower women. One is the voice, and the second is the literacy, and the third is the economic empowerment. It can be any of the three. Now, voice is, articulation, to speak up. Women can adopt two ways of exercising their rights to equality, the voice or writing. And what today I'll be talking to you about is the writing that has empowered women and the writing that has empowered the writers that are called a novelist. Now, the title is Indian Women Novelist. Under the title, there is a subtitle which is called Indian Writing in English, because these are the writers that have written through the medium of English, or they were able to articulate or give expression to their thoughts, emotions, or ideology, their points of view, in a language that is not their mother tongue, that is in the English language. And when we also talk about the title, Indian Women Novelists, somewhere sparingly, some cross-reference, I'm going to make a mention to a writer who has been translated into English. I mean, the writers have been translated into English, but we are reading these writers through this language, which is English. So, language that is English, we are talking about discussing the writing as a tool. Now, look at the title, Indian Women Novelists, Indian Writing in English. Now, what is Indian of the writing? Now, the writing is essentially in Indian in terms of its ethos, in terms of its sensibility, in terms of its preoccupation, because a writer writes with a preoccupation. We talk about a major preoccupation of the writer. We also talk about, use the term major ideology. A writer writes with a specific or a particular ideology, or an ideological framework constitutes a writer's writing. Now, when you look at this title, Indian Writing, writing is essentially Indian in the sense, the consciousness, the awareness, the response, the society that the novelist delineate, the family that the novelist delineates are all Indian, and they have an essentially Indian setting. Why am I using the word essential? Because here is what the writers do is that they are delineating, providing the situation, the context in which a family is constituted and have within a family. Because when you talk about all these novels that I might mention in my course of the talk, you find that there is invariably a family that becomes a center of a woman's existence. But how the family comes as an obstacle, as a way that prevents her from becoming an autonomous woman, and how the family, the culture, the society imposes its stereotypes and confines her to what is called the domestic space. The domestic, that is home and the world. The home becomes a world for her. And why, despite, I'm sure, any novelist that we read about, despite the fact that they write about, I'm sure they are consciously aware of their rights for freedom, for equality, liberation from the fetters of the confines of patriarchy. That is an obstacle. How they break free from this, confines. That's why we use the term domestic. I'll come to that in a minute. Indian, as I said, writing is because they use the medium of expression. From all of you, the participants here, how can writing in English do justice to the Indian writers? How can they be justified in being called Indian novelists or Indian writers? Because they are writing in English. So one of you might ask me this question. It's a vital question. It's a very pertinent question as well. But then one must also see that because India is a country, has been a country that has been colonized. And the language of English was then imposed. And later it has become a legacy. And this is a legacy. English language is a legacy. And for those of us, we are teachers of English, we invariably talk to everybody, speak to the students, teach them in English language. Now, the same question might be asked by the students as to why do you teach in English? What justice do you do? The same question is something one needs to probe or analyze where the novelists are concerned, because there is this medium of expression. It offers us a kind of a convenient tool to express their ideology, their thoughts, feelings, or whatever. And so that medium is essentially English. But then you can see that before this English, we read English or look at the title English, we have to give importance to or check the other two expressions used, Indian novelists. So they are Indian by birth or by religion, by culture, everything. They are Indian. They may be writers who are expatriate, they may be writers who are diaspora, they live outside of the culture. But you must understand that the writing reflects the culture, right? They are writing as an insiders, are as insiders to the culture. So their thought process, their consciousness is very much an Indian one. So the novel, now the question is why they take the genre of novel. Novel is in a genre that provides them larger space to write what they have to write, what they want to write, what they need to write. Initially, writers, novelists wrote for their own personal satisfaction, for their own personal understanding, because some of the writers have said, for example, Anita Desa, she said, I didn't think I would be writing that. At the end of it, I found that I had written that, but that was my work, so I couldn't do anything about it. So they write all of them, and who is this second writer I have with me? She also says that I didn't write. I think Anita Rai is somebody who says that writers write without focus on the gender. They don't write consciously aware of their being women. And they talk about, discuss the women's problems. And again, this is something we need to understand. Now, this is Indian women novelists. And now I would like to tell you a few things here. Now, I have made a selection of some of the novels I have read, I have written an article about, and I have taught at the Department of Studies English as a core paper, that is soft core paper. And that's why I think I have taught them so many years ago. I may not be able to remember much of them, but certainly I can say something about it. And then I'm sure you will have all some question to ask, because the title is Indian Women Novelists. Now, as I was telling you earlier, it is important. The women's movement created an awareness about the rights to equality. Now, whenever you talk about women's writing and women's writings, novelists or critics for that matter, especially the novelists, invariably the term feminism or criticism, these are the tools, ideological concepts that have been borrowed by the West, from the West, and has been adopted into intercultural spaces. Now, we look at them, and it's important for us to understand. I would like to look at the women, these novelists, where you can see the traditional kind of women novelists, where they are delineating women who remain where they are. There is, I'm sure, every woman center. Another thing I would like to mention is that the women writers make the women as central characters or protagonists, which has not been done by the male writers or male novelists. If you look at the criticism, or you look at the play, or you look at a novel by a male writer, invariably you'll find that they are marginal characters, or they may be what are called, flat characters, where they can't be round characters, or they cannot be center characters, because they have always remained at the periphery, or they have always remained at the margin. Now, when the writers take the pen to write, they consciously bring women from the margin to the center. They make them protagonists. And it is about the protagonist that you read, and the narrative revolves around and involves the protagonist's life and her responses to the situation around her within the family and outside the family. And that way, I have found that, though one can say that Anita Desai, she is a conventional writer, and she's probably a liberal feminist. I'm sure you are familiar with all these terms. But if in case you are not so familiar with the terms, you can seek clarification from me. But one thing about Anita Desai is that her writing, this is another important thing. When you talk about women in the central position or the protagonists of the narratives written by women themselves, they provide for, or they allow, what is called subjectivity, which means they become the center of their life and existence, and they can be talking about themselves. The subjectivity is something that has been denied hitherto by the male writers. So here, even in the third person narration, you find that a writer writes about a woman from the third person omniscience, and he doesn't do justice to the woman because she's never given, or she's denied, what is called the point of view. And so here, if you read Ellen Showalter, A Literature of Their Own, you can find that she divides the women into two categories. One is as a writer, in the sense that novelist I'm talking about. The other is that she becomes a critic who is aware, alive to the sexual codes, stereotyping, conscious, what you call negative reading, negative stereotypes that are created in male reading. So you become a critic, you are allowed to expose. It's a kind of reader, or in the position of a critic, you are a consumer of the writing, and so you will be alive to, aware of all these consciously done stereotyping, sexist responses. This is something. This is one thing you need to understand. Another is that another category of writing that Elaine Showalter identifies is that women as writers, because they are the ones who write about women. And that is very important for this talk today. Now, what do the writers deal with? And how do the women writers write about? Now, before we get into this, it's important for us to know that women's writing is hitherto centric. Writing has always been phallocentric. And phallocentric in the sense, whenever we begin to talk about something, or somebody say, he said, he did. So that is phallocentric. Women's writing is essentially an attempt to demasculinize the language. The language is masculine. So the women writers consciously attempt to demasculinize the language, make it human, or humanize the language. And through what Rita Felsky uses the term literary consciousness, they write with female literary consciousness, they write with female women's sensibility, and they write about female culture, what is called female bonding. So in that sense, you can see that every Indian woman writer invariably delineates a family in which a woman is placed. And all of these positions we see and understand are in the subordinate position. Or, to use Simone de Beauvoir's term, the other. Man sees himself as absolute. Woman is seen by man as the other. So the other, who is not what the man is. So what the women writers or the novelists tend to do is that they are giving expression to the women's interior mind, the inner psyche, or what goes on deep inside the mind of the women, who are the center characters, or they can be, somebody, I would say, some less important women characters within the narrative, because we are talking about women novelists. And particularly in Anita Desai, you can see this, the women are confined in the domestic space as wife, mother, or a daughter. Though there is awareness of the, what you call stereotyping and denial of rights to freedom, freedom of expression of thoughts or emotion, and also rights to life and existence. They try to wrestle with these living conditions. Some of them succeed in breaking the stereotype or breaking the domestic sphere and coming out of the domestic sphere into what is called the individualist space or the individual sphere. And create an autonomous person or an individual. The individual space, what we call autonomy, or the space, the individual space, is very crucial for a woman who has been subject to all forms of marginalization, oppression, or exploitation. Through awareness, gain what we call feminist consciousness, the consciousness that encourages her to dismantle the barriers erected against her because of the fact that she is a woman. In this sense, I would like to look at, another important point I would like to add here is that somehow or the other, because of the influence of the Anglo-feminism, the Western feminism, the term power, empowerment, the power is something that has been embedded in the women's definition, Indian women's definition of selfhood, the power, empowerment. And the other is the self, the selfhood, the individual identity of a woman. These are these concepts that have been borrowed from the Western feminism. And that has been part of the Indian feminist discourses. Now, in Anita Desai's fiction, particularly Where Shall We Go This Summer, you can see that she's pregnant with the fifth child. Remember, pregnant with the fifth child. This is something that is imposed on her, Sita. She has no choice over her pregnancy. She has no choice over her pregnancy. She has no choice to say no to her child. She is forced to have a child. And the inner consciousness, what happens inside the mind of the woman character, that is Sita, is what has been made available for the writer. You can see that she resists some of this kind of stereotyping and the way she has been confined to these domestic spaces and how she's not able to get out of them. And the imaginary island, the island that she goes as a kind of an escape. These are the perennial realities some of the perennial realities that Indian women have been confined to. Then we can see that escape, when she goes to that island, Manori Island, is a form of an escape, the only form of escape that was available for the woman who has been domesticated into being wife and mother. But the thoughts that happen inside the mind of Sita is something we can look at it as, I personally would look at it as radical, because she opposes, she resists in the mind, though she cannot act, she resists this kind of stereotyping, this kind of oppression. So that is one example I would like to draw upon. The next example is Nectar in a Sea by, Kamala Markandeya. Kamala Markandeya is a writer who was born in Karnataka, and she married an Englishman. She lived she lived mainly in England. Again, Nectar in a Sieve is again from the point of view of Rukmini. I'm not going to talk about the whole narrative or what happened in the story, nothing. Rukmini, again, she is somebody who is reduced to a woman's stereotype in terms of being the wife and mother, and later the grandmother. How the domestication, the stereotyping of Rukmini within the convention of the Tamil family, how that disallows her to break the stereotype. And can see that it is always said, I'll be using some Kannada expression, women are said to be Karunamayi, Karunamurti, Dayamurti, Dayamayi. Why not these, men not given this kind of labeling? Why only women are made to be the Dayamayi, Karunamurti? Why the generosity should be only the women's internal nature, and she gives expression to them? Why is she so self-sacrificing? Why does she make so many allowances for her family outside of her own rights and needs and desires? Why is she so self-sacrificing? These are certain of the things that you need to probe and analyze because of the extreme conditions in which Indian women are placed. That is one form of extremes, because she can't, an Indian woman has been socialized into accepting a definition of herself that is conducive to keep the family intact, irrespective of what her desires are, irrespective of what her wants are. So you can see how consciously she has been socialized, brainwashed. Do this, women, girls are not supposed to do this, that, this. So there you can see about Rukmini, she's conditioned, and it's very, very painstaking, poignant, and it is something we feel sorry for Rukmini. And again, there you can see there is the technology theme brought into the novel, that in Nectar in the Sea, where the women are forced to accept the changes that come through technology, and how there is a conflict within the individuals. So there is one thing I'm talking about Rukmini. Then Plans for Departure by Nayanthara Sahagal, one of the earliest writers. Again, there is the woman, again, she comes and she is exposed to the changing political situation in India. And what is important in this particular novel is how I would like to look at it as the protagonist being radical, is that she is able to finally express her mind through her action and decide to leave something that she considers very vital to her existence, her marriage. You see, marriage, again, Anita Nair calls, or I don't know who this writer, I have them, but I am not, marriage is a kind of an institution. Marriage is a kind of an institution. And it is something, a form of colonization of the woman's mind and the self. That is one of the writers have argued. Now, there is one thing what I would like to say is that when I'm talking about Plans for Departure, is that the protagonist is able to decide for herself. That is the individual, the autonomous self is given expression to in that when she makes a decision that is something that will be uh, good for her. Though there is the want, the desire that is actually compelling her to choose the other destiny, she decides what could be the best for her by walking out of the decision that she has probably fleetingly made concerning her marriage. Then I would like to look at these novels, the later writers, as something from the radical point of view, because they're able to break the dramatic confines and move towards the individual space. Now, Pinjar by Amrita Pritam. Now, there you can see she's escaped, she has been abducted, and then here what I would like to just focus on is the fact that she's able to use her skill. It's always said that women are rarely intelligent, rarely logicians. They cannot think, they cannot act, because through the binary, women are said to be irrational or emotional. Even Lucy Irigaray talks about this. Julia Kristeva also talks about this. They are irrational and emotional as against the men who are rational. Now, you can see in Pinjar, the protagonist is able to do something heroic. I don't like to use the word heroic. I would like to use the word. She's able to do something extraordinary, breaking the confines of the stereotype because she breaks free. She escapes being a slave to this Rashid, and she comes back to her family, though they finally reject her because she's kept captive to the Muslim return. She escapes. This is escape here is it suggests freedom. She is able to do something act and try to protect herself. Radical stand, I would like to look at as the writer's point of view. The other is some three novels of Shashi Deshpande. Shashi Deshpande. Let me read Shashi Deshpande before I take up. Where is she? Deshpande, she says, she's the one who says that marriage is the public institution. And I'm quoting Shashi Deshpande. Marriage is a public institution. Look at the word she uses. Public institution, an institution which becomes legal, by which and through which the woman's position, the name or the identity is made public to the outside world. From the family to the outside world, that is a society. She becomes a wife and later she becomes a mother. So Shashi Deshpande says marriage is a public institution. And within the marriage, which is a public institution, which is legalized, marriage is a legal institution again. And where some rules are observed. So I'm quoting verbatim, Shashi Deshpande. Rules are observed, means a woman has to do this, a woman has to do that, woman can't do it, the do's and don'ts of woman's existence. So in other words, she is from the moment of her birth. I have always argued in my research and all elsewhere, in all platforms, that women's identities have always been relational in the term from the moment she is birth. She is related to her father. Her identity is by the identity of her father. She's somebody's daughter. And later she becomes somebody's wife. And then last one, she becomes somebody's mother. So in all these three categories, in all these three names, she gains her identity only in her relationship with the man concerned, be it the father, be it the mother, or be it the father or the husband, and later the son. So what I would like to call a radical attitude, a radical feminism, because Shashi Deshpande is somebody, she doesn't like the label because of the isms. Otherwise, calls herself a feminist. What is striking about her novel, That Long Silence? Going by the title itself, that long silence. See, the silence has been that long. That long is within the marriage, which is a legal institution, which is also a public institution, as to quote Shashi Deshpande herself. You see, she has suffered because she's subject to silence. Silence becomes the existence, the entire existence of Jaya. I'm sure I got the name correct. Did I? Jaya is the protagonist of that long silence. That long. And what does the title also suggest is she has suffered because there was nothing else she could do. And silence is, as feminists have argued, as I would also endorse, silence is the absence of women speaking. Silence is invisibility, and silence is erasure. Silence is also erasure. Here, I would like to quote one of the important feminist critics. This is by name Elizabeth Mees. The woman is the absence of speaking, comma. The speaking subject is not the woman. Again, she says, to quote Mees again, to refuse to speak is to re-inscribe woman in silence and marginality. So here you can see they are forced to accept the silence of their existence in the sense that they are not allowed to speak. That is why we agree that voice, articulation, and subjectivities are one of the tools of women's empowerment. Now, there, that long is when she realizes that she cannot any longer or no longer endure. You know, there is a Greek saying, what cannot be endured has to be ended. What cannot be ended has to be endured. I think that Indian women are confined between, or, torn between these domestic extremes, because they cannot end the marriage because it is a legal institution, and as Deshpande says, public institution, and they can't walk out on the marriage. And some of the women who can't end the marriage, they just endure. And those women who dare to speak and are capable of raising their voice, resisting the male oppression and exploitation, they would end their, what cannot be endured has to be ended. So they end this continuous endurance of pain, suffering, atrocities, subordination, exploitation, and marginalization. And it takes such a long time for her to come to this kind of a decision. It is something that takes extraordinary courage, daring to end the silence. Means she has subjected herself to endurance, where she could just compromise and conform to. Conformity is the hallmark of Indian women. She had to conform to all kinds of, whatever you see in the narrative. But finally, she gains an awareness and she decides to end the silence, means to resist this kind of marginalization or subordination. That is very remarkable in the narrative, because at the last point of the narrative, the last point of the story, Jaya decides to end the silence. Now, there may be questions about how, what does it suggest? Is it an open-ended, whatnot? But then it is very important for us to infer that the very point of, or the act of decision, or deciding that Jaya decides to, or the act of decision making itself is radical. Means she decides to break the silence. And voice out, and empower. That is very, very significant towards the last part of the narrative. That is why I would like to look at this novel as a radical protagonist is radical, and that would, allow us to label uh, Deshpande as a radical feminist, because we have to place the writers in a particular feminist school of thought. Then the other is, again, another novel, subsequent novel, though it was written much earlier, Roots and Shadows. Hindu. Actually, Arizona have gone to the center of the margins where they lack the certain things. And Hindu, basically a journalist, she has not enjoyed her marital life, because she cannot give expression to her innate sexual desire, and which is done covertly with Noreen. It's what you might call adultery, whatever. But she is somebody, a radical feminist, because she's able to exercise her autonomy in experiencing what is called the sex desire. She's able to give expression, fully express her sex desire, and realize this in Noreen, which was something missing or absent in her husband. But then, what is another remarkable thing about the novel is that Indu, at the end of the novel, decides to, inscribe autonomy in the sense that she decides to continue her career as a journalist, which was something disallowed and not permitted by her, conventional, traditional male husband. So this is something radical. So what we see is that, okay, let me come back to this another novel. Moving on, again, you can see by Deshpande is another novel where she's a widow. But then you can see that she also has what you call what is taboo in the Indian Indian society, what is also a taboo Indian Brahmin orthodoxy. She's able to have an affair. It's not an affair as such, but she's able to have a relationship. It's a fleeting one, but then she's able to give expression to her sexual desire. So in that sense, and she's able to move on. This is a very important decision that the protagonist does take at the end of the novel, and she doesn't, though she's a widow, she lets go of the traditional marriage, and she's able to live her autonomous existence. So that is very remarkable about that novel. And the most important, the last novel I'm going to discuss now is the first ever time, probably, I'm not familiar. If somebody is aware, you can just enlighten me on that. I think probably this is the first ever novel by an Indian novelist who has explored the theme of lesbianism. Lesbianism that has been done by almost all the Western writers, you see. Adrian Rich and Barbara Smith were the writers who have defined what lesbian feminism is. And so here you can see that two things I would like to say about this particular novel is, this is the first time I think so, that the Indian novel has explored the theme of something taboo in the Indian context, theme of lesbianism, and how that can bring about female bonding and also build inner strength, you see, personal and the collective. The collective becomes crucial because it's not only, it enables the forging or fostering of a personal strength, autonomous person that she turns out to be, but also it forges what is crucial for women to become strong, the collective consciousness, whatever the term can be used, female bonding. This is the first time that has been explored or given expression to. I don't know what criticism came about that. There definitely was a lot of criticism on that. And one of the refresher courses where I gave a lecture on this, the women themselves were not happy about all this. All right, that is beside the point. The other important thing about the novel that I want to mention is that this is a novel where probably it may be a shocker to most of the traditional men and the very traditional women in India, because there is the protagonist who's about 45 years, Akhila, and there is a suggestion at the end of the narrative, not very clear, that she will go back to Hari, who's just about 28, 29 years. And what I found among the participants of the then refresher course that I gave a lecture on was that, my goodness, how can it be? It's not done, it's not allowed. But can such women, allow in India, you find that, or in the Western country, anywhere for that matter, I'm talking about any culture for that matter, or society for that matter, where men of any age, however old they are, how many marriages ever they can marry or have, they can marry a girl or a woman of just about 20 if they are 60, if that is permitted, why not the other way around? And so there have been lots of eyebrows raised against Akila, because there is a decision kind of suggested at the end of the narrative that Akila probably would marry Hari. And again, her sexual episode, the episode that brings about the experience, sexual desire that she is able to enjoy, at the last part of her trip down in Kanyakumari. So that is again something very, very radical by Anita Nair. And I would like to quote Anita Nair here. Let me get it here. Anita, yeah. She says that there is no need to categorize a writer as a woman writer, because she says that women write without conscious of the gender. But then what they have written about is essentially about women. And today, from the feminist point of view, the very word woman, female, feminist, or feminine, are characteristic feature of feminism and feminist ideology. One other novel, two novels I'd like to mention in the 5 minutes and conclude my talk. Another is Ishmat Chughta's The Whale. And you can see that though she is confined by being a Muslim woman, her book, short story novella, is a radical one in that there is this is another novel that explores the theme of lesbianism, by which the two women become empowered. That is one thing. And the other is Shivakami, the list writer. Her books have been translated in English. And not just the writing that is empowering the women. The writing also is a marker for the feminist voice. They're able to give expression to their ideology through their writing. So the Taming of Women by, Shivakami, it talks about the violence inflicted on the women and how men enjoy what is called the extramarital affair, and there is no law that questions them against this adultery, and how the men get away with that. And this explores the suffering, the muted suffering and the pain of the women. And it's, the way women have been tamed hitherto from historical context is through violence. You can see any novel, any text for that matter. So violence has been a method, a modus operandi the men have adopted to tame the women. To perhaps taming is to silence them. So on this note, I think I would like to end my talk. And if there are questions, I would rather welcome questions here. I'm kind of fast, I go very fast. I think if you are all having questions, I would rather answer the questions. Please feel free to ask me the questions. You please identify yourself, tell us your names, and what are you doing. because this is a refresher course, and I think this refresher course will help you reach somewhere in your life and future. And what are your research interests? On that note, and you can also have questions for me, please.
Good afternoon,
Please,
ma'am.
yeah.
I am Dr. Priyanka Kakuti from Assam. I work as an assistant professor in a college in Jorhat. My research area was on notice writings in English.
Ease.
Yes, is on notice
Yeah.
writings in English. And at the very outset, I would like to thank you for your deliberation. It was really very enriching and very
Thank you.
expansive indeed. Uh, Ma'am, I have, it's not exactly a question, but a kind of observation because
Sure.
you have been speaking about silence and how writers make use of how women are silenced in various novels. I would also like to not exactly ask you, but just bring this point forward that don't you think, ma'am, that silence is also used by some writers as a kind of voice? Like
Yeah.
silence, not
Yeah.
always meaning
Yeah.
being
Yes.
voiceless,
Yes. Yeah.
yes, but also a kind of resistance and there is a difference in the way how men writing about women and women writing about women because
Mm.
a regional novelist out here, Bhabendranath Hokia,
Mm.
he wrote a novel where he made use of this women's silence as a very strong voice for resistance.
Mm.
The story goes like where we have this lady and a village lady, and her husband he marries for the second time. So when he
Mm.
marries for the second time, the second wife is younger to him by around 25 years or 30 years, something like that. And the
Mm.
first wife, her reaction to that was she was totally silent. She stopped speaking to the person throughout her entire life, and she just didn't resist. But how he suffered because of the silence of his first wife. So that is how the novel goes. So that was what I observed after
No,
listening to that.
what are you trying to say is that the man suffered because of the woman's silence? Is that the point you're going to make
No,
there?
the point that I want to make is how she made use of silence as a strong voice.
Yeah, I will come to that. I'll answer that. Thank you
Yes.
for your question. In most, what I did mention that silence is also subversion in most of the women's writing here. Now, for example, that long silence, Jaya's silence, it is a preparation for, voicing out. It prepares her to voice out, to resist. So her silence becomes subversive to the end of the novel. That is suggested at the end of the novel. There have been very Western writers, for example, if I can quote, look at the novel that is titled The Scarlet Woman, the Scarlet, what's it? Scarlet Letter. There you can see that Hester Prynne uses signs, semiotics, silence as subversion because she brings about a change to the interpretation of the letter A. Adultery, it transforms itself to able angel. And she does it, and this is an act of subversion. Subversion is a weapon for the women. Earlier writers, they use deviousness or cunning to as a weapon, a resistance against male oppression or the patriarchal marginalization. So silence can also be argued as subversion. By silence, Jaya is silent, and she is able to break her silence, but that throughout the narrative you can find that she is preparing herself to end the silence. So that can be looked at as a weapon in subversion. So silence is also subversion. It's again deconstruction, because this is very important. But generally, feminism or the feminist discourses uh, uh, define silence by women as absence of women speaking. But there is the other way to look at it also. Silence can be a subversive weapon against, they can silently, you know, punishment, or by silence they can, send out the messages of resistance to men. Men have done that, women have done, and many novels have done that. So I don't know where I can talk about roots and shadows. If you can to see that Indu is silent throughout. When it comes to her relationship with her husband, she's silent. And in silence, she's actually being very, very subversive, because at the end, she decides to keep her autonomy intact by continuing her career as a journalist, despite the fact that her husband has opposed it. So you can see that there have been very many instances where silence also is seen as subversion. The narrative can also be subversive. So this is one point. Probably I missed to say that, but the fact that you did mention, Hester Prynne once silence the signs, semiotics. So there are ways. I think we need to, wade through the narrative, probe the narrative, look at the signs or silence as subversive techniques by women. There have been probably, but it is somebody who takes interest to read or look at the silence as subversion. If that is your area of research interest, probably I would encourage you to pursue it, because that is one way of writing an article or a research article that will provide another point of view to the reading, which has been conventional. Only those who look at, have voiced it. But I would also look at one thing I would like to add here is that village women, I have always said, the rural women, in almost all my talks, even the classroom talks, I've said that the village women or the rural women are not, literates. They're not actually literates, but the way they use their voice, they say, they don't say like us, the middle class women, Indian women, who use the plural, you, in aap or in Kannada, neevu. They don't say neeno. Sumke kutko, she will somehow able to resist the domination of her husband. So village women are more articulate, though they're not actually aware of feminism or ideology, or they're not even literate. But the voice is there amongst the, most rural women. But among the, urban women, when you talk about the urban reality, women, I'm sure, urban women are more silent, I would say, because they are more conscious about the image of their family, their own image, and they are the one who remain silent rather than give expression to their anger, give expression to their, what should I say, reservations about certain things. When you fight the man. Personally, I have fought many battles in my life against men. I've always fought. There has been some form of resistance from the male quarters. I've always fought the battles head on. I would say that.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Do you want to explain more on this point?
No.
You're clear.
Yes, I'm here.
Ma'am, good morning.
All right. Yeah.
Ma'am, good morning.
Yeah.
Ma'am, good morning, ma'am.
Yeah, please feel free to ask me the question. Yeah, I can see you also. I can hear you.
Ma'am, you talked about the Hari and Akila. Hari was a person in a desperate mood for having a sex. At the time, this lady, Akila, used him. And if we look at the character
Akila
of...
used him. Akila used him. Akila used him.
If we look at the character of... if we look at the character of Marikolundu, she has done a lot of things, ma'am, comparing to Akila. Because if we look at the character, we can see the sympathetic attitude, and even she is ready to forgive the person who raped her also. And for that, she has given a birth to a child. But once the boy was born, she did not like her. But later parts, when the husband was when he was born, she lost all her detestation towards the child. And she has done a lot of things comparing to Akila. a very good thing, and she has manifested as a very good humane in character and bold also, because to some extent she was having the lesbian kind of relationship also. But you used to glorify Akila for being more radical. In which sense you could justify this when you compare the character of Marie Kolandu, how Akila could be more radical?
No, I cannot compare the two, because here Akila is the protagonist of the narrative. So the whole narrative, the Ladies' Coupe itself is that an awareness is created in the protagonist when she meets them, and they all talk about their own personal narrative. So there is a point of view by all of them, each of them, and so they actually throw light on the women suffering. And when she has heard their narratives, when she has been able to get into their lived life, lived stories, she's able to understand life for what it really is. And actually, it enables her decision making at the end of the narrative. She becomes stronger by listening to this narratives, lived experiences, and she is a protagonist. So that is what Anita and I has done. So we cannot place the position of the narrative, I mean, protagonist, to give the position of the protagonist to Marikalontu. Now, if you ask me, this is my point of view. Marikalontu is raped. And naturally, a woman, I think you need to understand, it's very, very difficult for a man to understand the trauma, the psychological, the emotional trauma, the scar that is left after the rape of a woman. It was something that it is an unwilling encounter, and it has tremendous impact on the psyche or the emotions of the one who has been wronged, raped. So it is a different topic altogether. I can go at length, but I'm given short time to complete this discussion. So, but you see, the man who has raped her gets away with it, and he also is able to marry. But you see, she's subject to what is called in Indian feminism double jeopardy. One is that she carries the scars of the rape in the example of a living child of the man who has raped her. That's a result of the rape. And she is made responsible for the child. Look at it from the point of view of Marie Kollonta. Why she hates? Because he's a constant reminder or remembrance of the man who caused her that injury, the physical, the sexual, the psychological, the emotional injury. And it's an irrevocable damage. You can't come out of the damage. You cannot undo the damage. And that's why she hates the child, because he's a constant reminder of what she was subject to, the rape, the trauma. And if at all she forgives him, she cries out. She cries at the end. And then because her hate was something, again, she becomes a very traditional, conventional woman in the Indian context. Dayamaya Karunamurti, Indian woman is always a symbol of forgiveness. And she embodies that figure of Indian woman who is a symbol of forgiveness. She does forgive the child because she realizes that he is an extension of her flesh and blood. And that's why she has to relate to him as herself, as a child. That's the reason. But you cannot, make Marie Kollonta a protagonist of this narrative, because everything is about the growth of, Akila. And most of the, narratives involve journey. Journeys are essential, seen as quest, search for knowing who you are and what you are. At the end of it, Akila seems to realize that she is what she wanted to be. That is what it is. Is it clear? Or is it? Because this is my reading, each of us look at a novel from our point of view. And so this is, and also because Anita Nair wants to show how even a 45-year-old Akila is entitled to her own life. she's entitled to a life of happiness, whether it's marriage or otherwise. She's entitled to that life. Just because she's 45 within the Indian context, she is not somebody who should be denied or deprived of the joy, the ecstasy that comes from life's experience, whatever the experience may be. So it is that, she's trying to show that Akila, even at 45, not a single woman, is entitled to a life of happiness and joy. And she can decide, make a choice for herself. Is it clear? Okay. Any other? Another 15 minutes, I guess.
Afternoon, ma'am. This is Ajanta from Tamil Nadu.